Yeah, well, so I read your book, and there's something that stuck out to me. How can anyone talk about historical evidence for the resurrection when the resurrection, by nature, is a miracle, right? We all know miracles can't be proven scientifically.
Correct, but we don't have to prove a miracle to prove a resurrection.
Okay, love to hear you explain that one.
No, you just have to show that Jesus died and he was seen afterwards.
Right, but the very people who claim that they saw him are religious zealots. So in my line of work, we call those biased sources.
Well, I'm not interested in bias either, Mr. Strobel. You see, I care about the facts for professional and personal reasons.
Right, so where are the facts, Dr. Habermas? The resurrection narrative is more legend than it is history.
Really? Not according to historical records. Did you know that we have a report of the resurrection with specific eyewitnesses that dates all the way back to within months of the resurrection itself? That source also adds that 500 separate people saw Jesus at the same time. We're not talking decades or centuries after the cross, Mr. Strobel. It's months.
Witnesses, but that's still just one historical source, the Bible.
Wrong. There are at least 9 ancient sources, both inside and outside the Bible, confirming that disciples and others encountered Jesus after the crucifixion.
But they were already followers of Jesus.
Well, not all of them. Think of Saul of Tarsus. He originally was a persecutor of Christians. He hunted them down and killed them. Yet he died the Apostle Paul, proclaiming that Jesus was the Son of God.
But let's not kid ourselves here. People die for lies all the time.
900 people died drinking poison Kool-Aid at Jonestown.
True, and there are other examples like that throughout history, but here's the difference. People don't willingly drink poison for something that they know is a lie.
Fair point.
If the early church martyrs knew that the resurrection was a hoax, then why would they willingly die for it? Would you?
Of course. I should tell you I'm a bit of a history buff myself, so yeah, I'm particularly intrigued with your archaeological work.
Former life.
Former life, yes. I'm a bit surprised, given your stellar reputation, that you just gave all that up for this.
Would you like to be more specific?
Well, it just seems to me that for the better part of 2,000 years, Christianity has been creating these rituals and these rules. You know, they've erected these elaborate and often expensive cathedrals, and all of that to support a faith that I believe is ultimately built on sand.
And yet, it's all still standing.
Yes, because people keep telling each other the same stories over and over again. Just because I write something down and I bury it in the dirt, that doesn't make it true.
I think I'm beginning to see the crux of your visit.
Look, I understand that a number of people claim to have seen Jesus after his crucifixion, and some of them even wrote it down. But I guess my question is, how can we be sure of the reliability of those manuscripts?
Well, the same way we authenticate any historical document, by comparing and contrasting the copies that have been recovered. It's called textual criticism. The more copies we have, the better that we can cross-reference and figure out if what the original was saying is historically accurate. And the earlier they come from in history, the better. Take Homer's Iliad, for example.
Is this real?
That's as real as the Macedonian dirt that I dug it up from.
Well, the Greeks considered this their Bible for many centuries.
Yes, they did. That is one of 1,565 copies in existence today. Now, the Iliad was originally composed 800 years before Christ.
Okay.
This Greek copy is dated at the 3rd century AD.
So, 800 and 3rd century. So that's 1,100 years between this copy and the original, yes?
Correct. There is only one ancient collection of writings that has more authenticated copies than the Iliad. Can you guess what that is?
You're going to tell me the Bible.
The New Testament.
And how many copies is that?
To date, archaeologists have recovered 5,843 Greek New Testament manuscripts. That's 4 times as many as the Iliad.
Really?
The earliest fragment of the Gospel of John was found in ancient Egypt, and it dates to 2nd century AD.
How close is that to the original?
Less than 30 years. I have one of the fragments in my collection. It's quite a treasure, isn't it? After the New Testament and the Iliad, the runners-up don't even come close. We only have 100 copies of Sophocles, 7 copies of Plato's Tetralogies, and only 5 copies of anything by Aristotle. In fact, if you laid the surviving copies of Aristotle, one on top of the other, they would make barely 4 feet. You do the same with surviving copies of the New Testament, the stack would be a mile high. Nothing else in history even comes close. How is that for reliable?
Well, Father, I certainly appreciate it. You've given me a lot of food for thought.
Entirely my pleasure.
Oh, wow. The Shroud of Turin, that is a fantastic reproduction.
The actual shroud is in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Italy, under lock and key.
Of course.
And no one's ever proven if the shroud is the actual burial cloth of the Christ. But whenever someone looks in those eyes for the first time, the Galilean who hung on the cross 2 millennia ago suddenly becomes a real person.
But why would he do it? Why allow himself to be killed? If he really is the Son of God, why not use his power to defend himself?
The answer to that is what got me out of the dirt and into the church. It's really very simple. Love.
Love.
For the delay, I'm calling from Jerusalem. I have to give a lecture any minute. I didn't want to keep you waiting.
I'll cut right to the chase.
So I've been doing research into the purported resurrection of Jesus, and I want to run a theory by you. Maybe the reason
That the tomb was empty was because Jesus' body was never there in the first place.
because we know that the Romans used to throw the bodies of crucifixion subjects to the dogs, right?
Well, there's no evidence for that, but there are specific records that didn't happen to Jesus.
And what records are those?
Well, actually, the earliest recorded accounts tell us that Jesus was properly buried in a tomb. And the Romans did allow for burial of some crucifixion victims.
But then there's something that still doesn't add up
To me about all of these supposed eyewitnesses.
that claim to have found Jesus' empty tomb.
What, the fact that they were all women?
Yeah, because we know that according to Jewish customs, women were deemed to be unreliable witnesses. Am I right?
Well, true. So why did all 4 gospel writers record that it was women who discovered the empty tomb?
I'm asking you that.
Well, if you were a first-century Jew making up this story out of thin air, then you would never say that women discovered the tomb. It would damage your case, not help it.
Okay, so maybe we're dealing with the world's most inept disciple.
Or maybe the disciples reported what actually happened and let the chips fall where they may.
Okay, all right, but you have to admit here that there is a gaping hole.
Hole in all of this.
A gaping hole.
I mean, the fact that the Gospels are filled with contradictions about the empty tomb, okay? If I turned in a story that was this jumbled, I'd be out of a job. If we look through the Gospels, you start at Matthew, okay? Matthew puts Mary Magdalene and some other Mary at the tomb. You flip over to Mark, he adds Salome. You go to Luke, he adds
Mary, mother of James, and then some lady named Joanna.
What is that? You need a Sherpa guide to sort your way through this mess.
Sure, there are differences, but that doesn't trouble most historians.
Why? Why doesn't that trouble? It troubles me. It should trouble them.
Because the core of the story is the same in all 4. After Jesus is placed in the tomb, it's visited on Sunday morning by a small group of women, and they find the body is gone.
Now, you've studied law.
Yale law, yes.
And then you know that when policemen question several witnesses at a crime scene, they never expect the secondary details to be consistent as long as the core account is the same. In fact, if they're too similar, it's suspect.
That's true.
Well, that's exactly what we're talking about here.
The empty tomb is based on evidence, and isn't evidence your trade?
It is. Yes, but what if
The resurrection is one of the historical details that was recorded incorrectly.
how can we know? How can we ever know?
Lee, well, let me ask you something. Do you really want to know the truth, or is your mind already made up, regardless of the facts?
Oh, look, Doc.
I'm a journalist, okay? It's my job to challenge assumptions until they're proven otherwise. That's all I'm doing.
No, and I get that. But when is enough evidence enough evidence?
As much as I would like to help a fellow skeptic, what you're proposing is completely impossible.
But how can you say that? I mean, if Charles Manson can turn his followers into murderous zombies, surely the followers of the Christ cult could be convinced of their own delusions.
Listen, Hallucinations are like dreams. They happen in individual minds. They don't spread like the common cold.
Okay, so a hypnotist turns a stage full of insurance salesmen into clucking chickens. Then that's not really happening, or?
No, of course it is. The power of suggestion can be very profound. But it's one thing to be mesmerized into making animal noises. It's quite another for 500 people to have the same dream. To be honest, that would be an even bigger miracle than the resurrection itself.
And without an empty tomb, you and I, we're not even having this conversation. If Jesus recovered from his injuries, that solves that problem. All these people could have easily seen him, yes?
Yes, but I'm afraid that's not a brain issue. You need to speak to a medical doctor.
Of course. Dr. Waters, again, thank you for your time. You've been most gracious.
He wants to dispute the most significant event in human history. I feel it's important that we do it face to face, don't you?
Yeah, that's fine. I appreciate your time. So, my line of attack is this. The reason the eyewitnesses were able to see Jesus after Golgotha is because he never died on the cross.
Because if he doesn't die, there's no resurrection, yes?
That's right. So whether or not Jesus himself or someone else took him off of the cross early, or if he fakes his own death, it doesn't matter. It completely discounts every aspect of the resurrection.
Right, the swoon theory.
Yeah, but he passed out. He didn't die.
I'm afraid there's a long line of skeptics in front of you with that hypothesis.
Including only 1 billion Muslims the world over who also don't believe that Jesus died on the cross because the Quran says so.
With all due respect to Islam, the Quran was written 6 centuries after Christ. I prefer my historical sources a bit closer to accurate.
I understand, but you can see that it's possible.
Mr. Strobel, I am a medical doctor and a scientist. I have seen a great many strange phenomena in my lifetime. But the swoon theory is rubbish.
Rubbish. That's is that a medical opinion?
You know, it is, actually. Swoon theorists tend to skim over the fact that Jesus was flogged prior to his crucifixion. Do you know what happens in a Roman flogging?
Yeah, the person is lashed with a whip.
No, not lashed. Scourged and pummeled savagely. You see, the cowhide whip is braided with metal balls and bone fragments. The flesh on Jesus' back would have been shredded. The very muscles and sinews themselves laid open to exposure. The flogging itself would have left Jesus in critical condition from massive blood loss, which is why he collapsed under the weight of the cross that the Romans made him carry through town.
Okay, so is it possible that Jesus survives being spiked to the cross?
Oh, yes, you could survive it, but it's child's play compared to what comes next in a crucifixion. Slow, agonizing death by asphyxiation. Come with me. The stress on Jesus' chest muscles would have locked his lungs into the inhale position. Right? So in order to let the breath out, he would have had to shove himself up using his spiked wrists and feet, scraping his shredded back against the wood of the cross, and then sagged back down again in order to draw his next breath, which he would have had to have done over and over and over again until utter exhaustion just made it impossible. And then inevitably,
he dies, in theory, but let's remember, these soldiers, they're not doctors, okay? So maybe they took him off the cross and they thought he was dead, but in fact he wasn't.
No, of course they weren't medical doctors, they were professional killers. Right? And they were quite good at their jobs. They had to be. If a prisoner escaped alive, they themselves would be executed. Mr. Strobel, the crucifixion of Jesus is one of the best attested events in the ancient world. And, if you will, the final nail in the coffin, the swoon theory, is this. When the soldiers thrust their spear between Jesus' ribs, do you know what came out? Blood and water, which we now know is a description of pericardial effusion as a result of death by asphyxiation. This is not a condition anyone could fake. And so to answer your question, yes, it is my medical opinion that Jesus Christ died on that cross.
Excuse me, doctor.
A moment.
But I have a real problem with most of the experts that I've talked to here.
Which is?
Which is that most of them are not impartial, and if I'm going to take a guess, I would say that you are not either.
And you would be correct, sir. Though I have learned that most impartial travelers who undertake this journey rarely remain so. However, I can refer you to one of the most impartial sources that I know. Do you trust the Journal of the American Medical Association?
Of course, it is a stellar scientific journal, you and I will admit that. On the physical death of Jesus, clearly the weight of the medical and historical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead before the wound to his side was inflicted. Accordingly, interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge. Doc, I gotta tell you, you're not telling me what I hope to hear today.
Hey, what's the matter?
You people and your God, you just, you talk in circles. You offer just enough evidence, but never enough to be conclusive. Then you fill in all the gaps with, oh, well, yeah, you just gotta have faith. It's a bunch of nonsense.
You're really irritating. You know that?
Don't start with me, Kenny.
You don't waste a lick of time bragging to all of us how great a reporter you are. So why can't you put up or shut up on this story?
What are you even talking about?
Here's where the chili meets the cheese, my friend. One of my heroes was C.S. Lewis, a man who began as a skeptic, much like yourself. At the end of his journey, you know what he said? He said if Christianity is false, it's of zero importance. But if it's true, there's nothing more important in the entire universe.
The only way to truth is through facts.
The entire Christian faith hinges on the resurrection of Jesus. If it didn't happen, it's a house of cards.
You just have to show that Jesus died and was seen after.
How can we be sure of the reliability of those manuscripts?
Archaeologists have recovered 5,843 Greek New Testament manuscripts. Nothing else in history even comes close.
Do you trust the Journal of the American Medical Association? Yes, Jesus Christ died on that cross.
You're not telling me what I hope to hear today.
What if it is true? Wouldn't you want to know that?
The first recorded account tells us that he was buried in a tomb. The empty tomb is based on evidence. Isn't evidence your trade?
Faith is the evidence of things we can't actually see.
Any careful historian will see that the core account is consistent, even if a few of the secondary details are told from different perspectives.
500 separate people saw Jesus at the same time.
That would be an even bigger miracle than the resurrection itself.
The disciples reported what
People
actually
with
happened.
zero motivation to lie.
When is enough evidence enough evidence?
I felt something that is maybe more real than anything I've ever felt in my life.
This is not a condition anyone can
Still takes a leap of faith.
But why would he do it?
It's really very simple. Love.
All right, God. You win.